and loan conditionality and general arrangements that have been promoted by international financial institutions that dictate how these development programs are to be run by the southern developing countries. So the language of law and economics provides important analytics to be able to discuss these development programs, where economics and the role of the economists become extremely important and dominate a lot of the policy-making framework that is being presented, often at the exclusion of the jurists. Secondly, I'll try to draw on a little bit of the work that I've been interested in doing for the past couple of years. I've been working on a project trying to use the tools available within law and economics to challenge some of its own mainstream assumptions, while still using its language and its tools. So I use a lot of data, and I use a lot of data estimation techniques and econometrics, and I'm trying to benefit a little bit from the pretensions of the scientific neutrality or objectivity of law and economics, and trying to place myself as a critic within the movement itself, but trying to benefit of the fact that a lot of the arguments, or at least the language that is being proposed, has this guise of scientific methodology, and while doing that, being able to address issues that I think are better addressed, or at least will be better received if addressed from the camp of law and economics, even if only to resurrect some heterodox ideas about development that challenge some of these static goals, especially related to the normative project of law and economics. So I do that with the hope that maybe a space of resistance from within law and economics can be emerged. And therefore, I will focus today on two critiques that I think are particularly important, and I heavily borrow in what I'll be talking today from the work of Duncan Kennedy to draw on these extensions of that critique to development studies. So the first critique is about efficiency, and the second critique is about redistribution. And in the next couple of minutes, I'll try to show you how Duncan's work critiquing cost-benefit analysis and his work, as we heard a little bit about it in the morning, about landlord-tenant law, especially regarding the imposition of compulsory duties into these private law rules to achieve redistribution of wealth and income, can allow us to be able to present a more nuanced critique relevant to development studies, but also at the same time offer a constructive project or proposal for development in the South. And I'd like to highlight that towards the end of my presentation. These critiques have been integrated into heterodox development studies, and as I introduced earlier, at the end of each critique, I'll try to present some results of my own work on market structure, competition, and industrial policy in the South. So starting with the critique on efficiency, what I mean, or what is meant by law and economics, refers to the body of literature that is taught in the tradition that proposes and elaborates cost-benefit analysis as a way for policymakers to be able to recommend rules to judges, legislators, and administrators. And mainstream law and economics proposes that courts make these decisions, or make market-defining private law rules according to the Calder-Hicks definition of efficiency, leaving all distributional question to the legislative enacted tax and transfer. So there is an active or a very obvious neglect of all distributional questions, despite the fact that all of these rules have distributional elements. So the efficiency talk starts from accepting the absolute rights of property and freedom of contract, and when it comes to markets, which is the part that I'm particularly interested in, looks at, or at least mainstream law and economics, says that the free market system is the efficient system to lead to the best outcomes, and this is only possible under perfect competition. So perfect competition plays a central role in the analysis of achieving any efficiency, and any market failure is then treated through specific regulations that are aimed at restoring perfect competition, which in turn will then bring about all of these great efficiency outcomes that are projected. This methodology is presumed to be uncontroversial due to the very simple premise that we are supporting a legal change in the legal regime that helps those who gain by it more than it hurts those who lose. So it appears to utilize this objective scientific methodology that claims that it's apolitical, it is coherent, and it's free of value judgment. You just see if the winners make more than the losers, and if it's so, then this is a good rule, and so be it. However, Duncan's work on his critique on cost-benefit analysis shows very clearly that none of this is true. It is indeterminate, controversial, political, and has a bogus air of neutrality and objectivity, given a long list of political decisions or choices that the application of this methodology entails, but everyone seems to ignore and then jumps to the conclusion that it's neutral and apolitical. I won't go through all of the critiques, but one of the important ones is that ignoring the initial set of endowments, both factor and entitlements, favors the status quo, often rich-friendly rules, and allows the law enforced to become the baseline of analysis. So knowing about these empty promises of efficiency, I think, is extremely liberating in the sense that it gives way to an equally politically motivated alternative that can guide development studies and that can allow them to break away from the neoliberal or mainstream law and economic prescriptions of following the perfect market competition, allocative efficiency proposals. And I think this is vital to the extensions of developing studies, especially that the countries in the South have subscribed to that mainstream neoliberal approach, following the stated goals of allocative efficiency. Promising to achieve that or being promised to get at these efficiencies through perfect competition and free trade. But as we all know, and as has been obviously shown and presented over and over, is that developing countries have only plunged into more poverty, inequality, dependency, and debt. All these proposals for trickle-down economics have failed. The entrenched local elite and the multinational have captured most of the surplus. And despite the fact that there is no holistic development policy available to show what the alternative is, those countries that have taken off have shown to have followed policies where efficiency did not play a central role in their analysis. These alternative goals are extremely wide. Some of them have focused on industrial policy, fostering national champions, promoting expert cartels, and only encouraging oligopolistic rivalry, but not perfect competition. So here the work, for example, of Alice Amsden and others show that these heterodox growth theories, or countries that have followed these heterodox growth theory, have outperformed those that were stuck in this perfect competition deadlock. Working on market structures myself, what I've done is I've looked at 50 developing countries, and I looked at the relationship between their competitive structure and growth in the manufacturing industry since the 1960s. And I've collected data to look at the relationship between competition or competitive market structure and growth in the manufacturing industry. And I found that most of these countries do not grow under the assumptions of perfect competition. So what actually happens is an inverted U relationship between competition and growth. So at initial levels, encouraging some competition is essential for countries to grow, which might make a lot of sense, because what is happening at that point is that a lot of the means of production that are controlled by a few local elite are broken up, and you create some basic rivalry. But then once more competition is introduced, then this leads to negative outcomes and doesn't necessarily allow the country to continue on the growth trajectory. So by showing that, I think it's a very nice relationship to be drawn back to the critique of efficiency, namely that all that has been said about the benefits of efficiency and its centrality to development studies in terms of focusing on allocative efficiency has actually been shown to not be the case when I collected actual data and did what they do. So I used the numbers, used the techniques that they would use, but proved that many of these mainstream assumptions are actually not true. The second critique that I wanted to talk about is, again, the mainstream law and economics ignorance ignorance of the redistribution of wealth and income and social power through the modification of private law rules. And they argue that this should be dealt with under the tax and transfer system instead. This prevents, in many instances, this reconfiguration of the ground rules of property and contract that define the free market. And here I want to draw on Duncan's work on housing, where he shows in his pieces that selective enforcement of, for example, a warranty of habitability as a duty factor into these lease contracts in certain specific market conditions, so an important market analysis needs to be undertaken, can actually achieve real distribution from the landlord to the tenant. So this depends, for example, on the market structure in terms of how many competitors are on the firm. Are the landlords locked in with their investments? And the same can apply to firms. Are the firms locked in with their investments? So in that case, they will not be able to they will have to carry the increase of the cost of the duty themselves. They will not be able to translate that into higher prices. The same with markets that are extremely elastic. So when you have elastic demand, again, the sellers or the landlords will be not able to increase the cost of whatever they're offering, and they will have to bear the cost of the duty themselves. So these compulsory terms that can be factored into these kind of arrangement do have these effect of creating that real distribution. That is arguably, or I try to argue, also extremely important for the kind of development studies that I talked about earlier. Namely that firms in the South, especially, or regardless of which option they, what kind of framework we look at, but firms in the South are in many instances concentrated, or the markets are concentrated. So they're either just concentrated because of the earlier ISI policies where you have few industries being dominated by few firms, or because of the neoliberal approach allowing privatization and then consolidation into the hands of a few local elites, and then mergers, foreign direct investment, and so on. But the story is that most of these countries do have concentrated firms or concentrated markets, and therefore maybe if such a compulsory duty can be factored in these contractual arrangements, then some kind of redistribution can be achievable. And one idea would be, for example, to allow firms that have a certain element of market dominance to be forced to fund something that can be called a consumer trust out of the rent that they're generating, and this rent can be then redistributed back to the consumers, who end up by default paying higher prices every time they buy a product of the firm that is selling under these dominant market conditions. So in a way they become stakeholders into that trust, and they can benefit from being considered as stakeholders, so not only to be compensated for any losses that they sustained, but they can also be thought of as being able to receive more than just the compensation for their losses, which is similar, again, to, I draw the similarity here with Duncan's work of setting up this consumer community land trust that will allow, for example, the surplus extracted from the development forces to residents and then redistribute that to residents in the form of limited equity residential tenure or infrastructure development in impoverished neighborhoods. So these distributive objectives are achievable through these change of background rules that organize these kinds of relationship. And I chose to highlight these two critiques, CLS critiques of law and economics, that I think are extremely empowering, and by offering this conceptual vocabulary, by talking concretely or more technically about development studies that aims at achieving other things than efficiency, so other predetermined social goals, for example, that in and of themselves are as politically driven as the efficiency criteria that just pretends to be apolitical. And I just want to end by saying that using the language of law and economics can be in and of itself a strategic move to find the space within law and economics to expose the limitations and the flaws of that